Hello, this is Joshua Brown, the Education Programs Coordinator here at the Nebraska Arts Council. Just starting at the very top, I'm going to give you an overview of the sort of things that the Nebraska Arts Council does and the sort of things that we prioritize with funding. Just some sort of general things. A great place to start is the mission statement. The Nebraska Arts Council is a state agency that promotes, cultivates, and sustains the arts for the people of Nebraska. And the arts that covers writing, of course, and visual arts and dance. Flamenco, of course, is in there. Theater is in there as well. But we sure do support a whole lot of different cultural activities that include folk arts and folk performances, like our wonderful Frick Roper on our roster. So there's a lot of different artistic activities that our organization supports. Our offices are located downtown in Omaha, right on the new park. It's a really great place to visit. So if you're in town, please stop by and say hello. Our offices are open Monday through Friday. Just let us know when you're coming so we can make sure and have somebody at the front to let you in. We've got a great gallery in the back, so come check out the Fred Simon Gallery while you're with us. You can call us anytime. That number here is our main office number. You can just ask for any one of us and you'll get directed back to our terminal. There's a handful of requirements that we have about which organizations can be funded. Government entities, a subdivision of the government like a library or a school, no problem. A nonprofit organization, absolutely. We do a lot of service to nonprofits. There are some grants that are available directly to artists, but that's not the main category of grant that we have. It's mostly directed towards organizations. Those organizations have a tax identifier, an EIN, a tax identifier number, an employer identifier number. They also have a sam.gov number, eligible organizations. This is something that we have been adapting to this year. sam.gov is a registry number from the federal government. We require it to fund your organization. However, your organization won't have it unless you've gotten to sam.gov to actually get your organization registered. So it's important to do that before you apply for one of our grants, if you're a nonprofit or a government entity. The good news is a lot of organizations actually already have sam.gov numbers and don't know it. So check with your administrators if you're not sure. If you do need some help getting a sam.gov number, we can help here at the Nebraska Arts Council. The best place to start would be by sending an email to grants.info@nac. I'm sorry, Stephanie, what's that email? She's putting in the chat for us. It's the email to Jennifer Drivelvis. She's our grants data administrator here for the Arts Council, and she can help you with your sam.gov number. Church, mosque, synagogue, these are all examples of nonprofits that are eligible. So if you're not sure if your organization is eligible, it might be just check on your nonprofit status. These are examples of the sorts of things that we do fund, although these are kind of what we aspire to fund, perhaps. They're not hard categories. Showing cultural and generational diversity, for instance, we love to fund things like that. Is everything we fund quite like that? No, sometimes it's all fourth graders in one bus going to the Jocelyn Art Museum or something like that. That's a great thing too. They're all fourth graders. That's not very diverse, but you know, there are a lot of ways to think about that too. We love to see things that are fostering access for underserved communities. But again, that can be hard to define. So don't limit yourself if you think that your program or what your organization is doing doesn't quite fit into one of these categories. Don't let that stop you. These are the things that we love to fund, and we are also generous with our definitions here. However, if you go to the next slide, we're a lot more strict about the things that we can't fund. Artistic fees for students, we won't do it. That would be scholarships, awards, things of that nature. It's just not what we do. Art projects that exclude the public. These are private events, anything that yeah, you can't buy tickets for publicly, anything that's not accessible to the public. Capital improvements, construction, restoration. These are things that our grants generally do not cover, although there is a big caveat with accessibility projects, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Events and projects that have already taken place, so nothing retroactive. It all has to be coming up, and we have deadlines, or at least kind of submission windows for all of our grants, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Food and bev, that is not something that we fund as well. The exception would be travel stipends for artists who are working on projects. They do get a per diem, which can go to food. And then general operating expenses is generally not going to be something that we're funding unless you are participating in the basic support grant. And that is a invitation grant. So that's not something that you'll be able to click on online on the portal that we're going to talk to you about. So nothing to worry about, but not something to expect either. Some more things that we don't fund, permanent supplies and equipment. We do have mini grants that can fund some of these activities, but most of our grants don't buy supplies or equipment. Again, political activities, that's not something that we can send state dollars towards. Prizes, awards, and scholarships for artists, students, for anybody, that's a no-go. Projects that are already receiving NAC funding. And Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to hop in here and talk a little bit more about which projects can and cannot receive funding if they've already got a funding source from us.
Yeah. So in general, we are not going to let grantees or applicants double dip. And so if you have a single project, say a summer music series, you won't be permitted to apply for a mini grant and a project grant, let's say. There are a couple of little caveats to that. If you are applying for some accessibility funds and event services, that can be separated out. And then additionally, if you are applying for the Nebraska Touring Program sponsor grant, a mouthful, and that would be an exception. And again, you just need to separate that out. And we will talk about those two categories a little bit later on. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. And the last, we don't fund it, is a reduction of existing deficits. So unfortunately, no paying old bills with our grants. But I think most of the grants that we have are pretty clear about what they do fund. So I think the best way to start to kind of understand what we have is by coming to an event like this, or just by browsing through the grant categories on our website. That'll tell you a lot about what we do and don't fund. And that kind of brings me to our next station here. I'm going to tell you about the handful of grants that I manage and how you can best take advantage of them. In general, the grants that I have are very easy to apply for. They're not competitive. That means you're not fighting anyone else for funding, and your funds won't be reduced if other people's are well funded. These are kind of first come, first serve. If your application checks all of the boxes, then it's going to get approved. And that takes a lot of the stress out of applying for these grants. So not every one of our grants is like this, but if you call me, you're going to get a grant like this. The first one is artists in schools and communities. Just very broadly, this pays for artist fees. So if you are looking to have an artist come and do a special presentation for a day or a week or a month, maybe even half of a year, this is the grant that you want to kind of look at. Sponsoring organizations can be schools, but they don't have to be. We have a lot of awesome programs that take place under this grant that are just through nonprofits and after school organizations. There's a few kind of tiers to this program, like I was alluding to that a little bit. One is the visit tier, and that's 3 sessions that can be on one day. That can be 3 sessions in 1 week, and those sessions are about an hour long. So a very small grant, usually $300 or less, and a very limited project. Residency is the one that I do the most of. These are between 10 and 30 sessions. They tend to be kind of serving more than one population in the school. If it's at a school, it might be 2nd and 3rd graders, maybe not just one classroom, but all the classrooms at school. And if it's an after school program, or if you were having a program at church, it might be once a week for 12 weeks, something like that. So that residency version of this grant gives you a little bit more time to work with. The budgets are very clear if you go in and apply for it, but just keep in mind that the artist fees may not exceed $1,650 on this project. School bus for the arts grants are one of my favorite categories of grant because they're so easy. They're really, really easy to apply for. And this is another one of these that it doesn't have to be a school taking advantage of it. I don't think we have any schools in the audience today. So I'm going to suggest some ways that nonprofits can take advantage of these. If, for instance, an after-school program wanted to take a group of children to an event at the Rose Theater, this would be a great grant to pursue because you could take not only the cost of the bus, but also the admission cost into account for this grant. And they're, like I said, they're just so easy to apply for. There's a little bit of final reporting to do, but the application itself, and I always say this, you can do it in one breath. If you take a big breath at the beginning, you can fill out the application before you let it out. Terrific. If you haven't investigated it, do it with an open imagination because there's a lot of potential for nonprofits to take advantage of these. Arts accessibility grants. This is one of our kind of unusual grants in that it does fund capital improvements, the improvement project version. You can get up to $5,000 a year to improve the accessibility of your property. And that can take a lot of forms. It could be a new automatic door or a hearing loop. There have been a lot of really creative applications in this category, and I encourage everyone to use their imaginations when they are applying. It requires a letter of intent, and that letter goes to me. You just kind of explain what you want to do, and then I will take it and see if it fits our guidelines. But again, they're very broad. If it supports an improvement of accessibility, then it may be fundable, but it tends to be a little bit subjective, and it tends to be a bit of a conversation. So send me an email, and we'll figure out if your project fits that. The other version of this grant is for event services. Again, there's a lot you can do with this. It was originally created to help pay for ASL interpreters at events. What's that? American Sign Language is what that stands for. So certainly you can cover your events up to 5 events at $300 per event. Will help pay for those translators. But there's also a lot of other things you can do with this grant, which includes Spanish translation or other language translation. And that could be in person or it could be in print for audio descriptions. Even transportation has been discussed as something that could be supported by this grant. So again, if you have a question about it, please send me a note and we can maybe work out something. And creative aging through the arts. This is one of my favorite grant programs that we do at the Arts Council. The grants are really flexible and broad. They cover artist fees, just like artists in schools and communities. But they also provide stipends for the artist's travel, for participant supplies, $200 for participant supplies, art supplies, and then $200 for organizations who are sponsoring. So, and that can be very helpful in many cases if you have smaller community centers that struggle to cover the cost of having somebody on site, maybe during unusual hours, or maybe there's only one librarian, period. So some of that administrative stipend can help those go through a little bit better too. These programs take place at all sorts of different community locations. We've had a lot of them at libraries, community centers, retirement communities, really any nonprofit that serves older adults. This is perfect. And we define older adult as 55 plus, but that's not a hard and fast rule either. That is just kind of the zone that we're looking for there. If somebody is 50 years old and signs up for one of these art programs, well, we don't check IDs. That's all I'm trying to say. It is a really lovely program. And if you have any inclination that your space might be a good place to host something like this, and again, think broadly, writers, visual artists, theater, dance, storytelling, send me an email. I would love to talk to you about it and see if we can't get a program going. I think that's the last of the grants that I have to talk to you about today. So I'm going to turn things over to Stephanie and listen to her talk about mini grants.
Thank you, Josh. So yeah, I am Stephanie Plummer, and I'm a program coordinator here at NAC. And whereas Josh is a program coordinator who works mostly with education grants and education programming, I work with community grants and community programming. And so one of the categories I oversee is the mini grant category. And you can see that there's like really sort of a minimal description of what events it could fund. And that's because it's a little bit of a catch-all. Mini grants really cover a whole host of different sorts of arts projects, anything from workshop series to murals, theater performances. Really, if it is a public-facing art event, then this category may be a good fit for it. It has a $2,000 maximum request, and it does require a cash match, so that means no in kind. And that needs to be dollar for dollar. So if you're requesting $2,000, then you need to show $2,000 of income in some form. And you can see too that request is fairly small. And so this category tends to really cater towards smaller organizations with smaller budgets and projects with smaller budgets as well. And so sometimes it's I would say typically actually this grant in particular, those total budgets, they're going to be under $10,000, and that's probably on the high end. And that's not to say that it can't be more than that. That's just probably the average. And this grant also is sort of a good preparatory grant if you want to eventually apply for larger grants. And so we have a lot of small organizations and small projects that go in here. And so one nice thing about this category is that organizations can request up to 2 mini grants per fiscal year. And if you remember in those rules, or not rules, that sounds a little tough, but those guidelines about what sorts of things we fund, you remember that we will not fund a project twice, right? So that means that these 2 mini grants need to cover different projects. And so if you have your summer music series and you have one grant that covers that, then you could probably apply for another grant that maybe covers, a series of music workshops or a Christmas concert or something in the spring even. So You just want to think about that when you're applying, because this particular grant has a 6-week deadline. You can apply as far out as you want. And so right now those grants are open. And so you could apply for an event that happens in February of 2024. But you want to apply at least 6 weeks. So don't wait on it. If you're at the 7-week mark, right, if your event is happening, like in, let's see, it's 4/21 now. So if it's happening in early June, you probably want to get that application in now. And so the reason I say plan those out is because if you do end up applying for too many grants and it needs to be 6 weeks ahead of time, right? You want to think about, well, when do I need to apply for that then? And the other thing you want to think about too with this particular category is that we start out the fiscal year with a bucket of funds. And as people apply, those funds go down and down and down and down and down. And so it's possible that if you have an event in May of 2024 and you wait to apply until April or maybe even February, we may already be out of funds and that category may be closed. And so you really want to think about when you're applying for some of these grants that are floating, because they do run out of money. All right. And the next category that I want to talk about is the Nebraska Touring Program. The grant itself in the system is usually referred to as the Nebraska Touring Program Sponsor Grant. A little bit of a mouthful, so we tend to shorten it. And internally, we even shorten it a little bit more to NTP. And this utilizes a roster that's similar to the one that Josh discussed in relation to the Arts in Schools and Communities grant. So on our website, and I shared the link a little bit earlier, and maybe Josh, if you want to pop that artist roster link from the website in there one more time, that'd be nice. So if you go to the roster on our website, you can filter based on whether you want a teaching artist or a touring artist. And essentially, these artists go through a process of applying to be a part of the roster. And then those applications are reviewed by a panel of presenting organizations, so like the ED from a performing arts center. So they look at all of these applications and adjudicate them and determine based on the level of like professionalism and touring experience, whether they're a good fit for the roster. And so if you're a small organization and all volunteer, then having this roster as a resource is great because it saves you a ton of time and it lets you know that these artists are professional and are capable of leading, the performance, or the event. So it's a really great resource for a small organization. One caveat here is that artists need to live at least 30 miles away from the applying organization. And so that means also if your organization is based in Omaha, then you won't be able to hire an Omaha artist and have it covered under the grant. We do have plenty of organizations who go to that roster just to look and see who they want to hire. And they may or may not use the grant in that case, right? If they're looking for somebody that is in their town, then they wouldn't be able to apply for the grant, but that doesn't mean that they can't hire that artist outside of that grant process. But one of the purposes of this touring roster is to get these artists across the state, right? To have rural artists who come into the cities and perform and showcase their artistry, and likewise have artists from urban areas in Nebraska go out to rural communities and show those audiences, that artistry as well. And so it's really, I think, an important part of this program and something that I think is really valuable. But it is something to consider when you are planning out your event and planning to apply for this grant. The grant pays for 45% of the artist fee up to $2,000. And we have that $2,000 sort of mark because we have a couple of performing groups on the roster that are quite large and command much higher fees. So orchestras, ballets, so things that have a lot of moving parts and thus have a much higher artist fee. I will say, I think all of the artists that I looked at have very competitive fees listed. But definitely, if you're talking about bringing in an entire orchestra, it can be costly. And so if we did that, it would knock the whole budget for the year out. So up to $2,000. This category only pays for the artist fee. So it does not pay for travel. There's not a per diem. Again, if you work those details out with the artist outside of the grant process, that's totally fine. The artists are free to be artists and to actually book those things themselves. And we actually don't even act as the booking agent for them. We are just the mechanism by which they get these grant funds paid to them. We pay the organization and the organization pays the artist. But what I will say though is that different organizations structure those artist fees in different ways, right? So as long as we have a contract that says artist fee and does not say travel fees on it, then that artist fee is going to be allowable in the category. And then in relation to the question Josh asked earlier about this, right, whether this would be considered double dipping. Because this strictly pays for the artist fee and no other expenses, then it is possible for an applicant to apply in a project category like, say, mini grants. And that application would cover other expenses. I will say the way that mini grants are adjudicated and reviewed and evaluated, if it's not intended to cover like a very specific expense, so that application would probably not do well in the process, the review process, if it is only covering like the marketing for this event. So you again want to think carefully about which applications you are applying for and how that relates to your programming for the year. The next grant that I want to talk about, and it's sort of related to the Nebraska Touring Program grant, is the Presenting the State Poet grant. The reason it's related to the Nebraska Touring Program grant is that they go through the same application in our grant system. You go in and you select whether you want the Nebraska Touring Program or the State Poet grant. But they are distinct in terms of what they fund and how much. So this grant program is intended to support the fees associated with bringing Matt Mason, our state poet, out to your organization to do a reading and perhaps workshops. And so he's got, I want to say, about one more year left in his term. And so he does have a goal of hitting each county in the state at least once, and he's on his way. He's an incredible poet, but also an incredible traveler. And so yeah, so what is really nice about this particular grant is that it covers everything but $50, right? It doesn't cover like the marketing and things associated with that, but the way the budget and the contract work here is that you enter the mileage and it calculates the per diem and the travel cost and the artist fee for you. So those expenses can be included. There's also a calculation in there if you want to do workshops. And so it creates that whole total. And then it tells you, regardless, only $50 for your organization. So it's a really fantastic way to do some programming for your community with limited funds. And we, again, just like with the Nebraska Touring Program, we don't book Matt. You would want to contact him and work those details out with him. And that information is available on our website, but certainly feel free to reach out to me and I can get you in touch with him. I won't book for him. He's got a busy enough schedule without getting me involved, but I will put you in contact with him if you would like that. And I will say too, just from personal experience, he's really great to work with. And his poetry is really accessible to so many different audiences. And he's really, wherever he goes, it's usually an exceptional experience for the people who are there. So the next category is microgrants. And earlier, Josh had mentioned that there is a grant category that does have a way for us to pay individuals. And this is really outside of a few artist services that are not really grants. This is really the only grant that can really provide funds directly to an artist. We have 2 tracks in this grant category. One is community arts projects and the other is artist development. The community arts projects can be led by an organization or by an artist. Those organizations do not necessarily need to be incorporated. So for example, if you have a a music ensemble, right, and you want to put on your own performance, then you may not be incorporated as a nonprofit, but you would still be able to come into this category as long as you have a relatively small budget. And I should mention too that, and it says it below, artists can apply multiple years. Organizations cannot. Organizations can only apply once in this category. And part of the reason for that is it's really intended to help sort of create a track for organizations to ask for more money in the future. So we encourage small organizations that are just getting started to apply in this category and work closely with me on the application, get a little grant writing experience under the belt, so to speak, develop a connection with a staff member, so me. And then that way, next year, when you're growing your programming, then you can apply for a mini grant. And then once you have a few of those under your belt, you can apply for a project grant, which is quite a bit more money. So this is really a one-time thing for organizations, but it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the grant writing door. The reason artists can apply for multiple years is because artists tend to be left out of grant making almost entirely. Certainly there's some regional and national grants and a few local grants to Omaha that artists can apply for, but there's just not the opportunity there for that kind of funding support. And so artists can apply in multiple years. And again, they can do the community arts project or they can apply for the artist development track. And I haven't talked about that yet, but it's, I think, a really incredible opportunity. With the artist development, it's intended to provide funds for professional development, equipment purchases, sort of marketing support. So for example, if you need to purchase, say, a new potter's wheel, that would be perfectly acceptable and eligible in this category. If you wanted some better lighting in your studio space, that would also be acceptable. We've funded ventilation improvements for ceramicists, cameras for photographers. It's a good idea to reach out to me first and ask, is this a good idea? Is this fit into the category? But generally, if it's something transformative to your practice or your ability to sell your work, then we're going to be on board for that. And it's not just visual artists too. We've had actors and directors who have applied for workshops that help them with trauma-informed directing, right, for the stage. So it can be workshops as well. We've even sent musicians to conferences out of state because they, especially if it's a rare sort of art form, but so they have that collaboration and they're learning new skills and they're advancing their careers as an artist. So there's a lot of opportunities in terms of what can be funded here. This is an incredibly small grant budget for this category though. So really spots are limited. there's a letter of interest that needs to be sent in. And so if you're thinking about doing this, I would go ahead and reach out to me pretty early. We've already had, I think, and it's only been open maybe a month, probably about 5 letters of interest already. So I would go ahead and reach out if you're interested in this. One other nice thing about this category is that it does not require a match. Certainly, if your budget, your expense budget is $1,000 and you're only requesting 500, we're gonna want to know where that other 500 is going to come for. So we're looking for a balanced budget, but we don't require a match for this. And again, we really want to help some of those organizations that are really community centered and grassroots based get going. So that's why we do that. So now that we've kind of covered all those categories, I'm going to take you through not our entire system, but how to get started in our system. So this is our website. Our web address is right there, and you may have applied or you may have clicked on it with one of the links we shared in the chat already and have been exploring, but that's our main page there in that last slide. And so once you, actually, let me go back. Once you apply for a grant right there at the top, then it takes you to the next page, and I've highlighted the link that you want. It's under how to apply, and you click on grant system login. And you can see on the right there, there's a whole list of those grant categories. And if you click on any of those, that's going to give you some additional information as well as the contact person for that particular grant. So once you have clicked on the grant login, the grant system on that previous page, then it will take you here. And you want to either log on if you already have an account, or you want to create a new account if you're new to the Arts Council. If you're not sure, then I would go ahead and reach out again to nac.grants@nebraska.gov. Or if you're interested in a particular grant, say you want to email me about a mini grant, I can look that up for you. But those are your 2 options there. And so also too, I will say, if you have logged in before and you've forgotten your password, we won't be able to find that for you. It's something we just, it's not, our system's not set up to show us that information. We can tell you the email address perhaps that was used for the login, but we won't know the password. But the forgot your password process is really easy. I did it 2 days ago. So so I would go ahead and recommend just clicking forgot your password if you can't remember. So once you do that, and it's going to take you into the system. Now, if you are already a part of the system, you'll see in the next screen what that's going to look like for you. If you are new, though, this is what you will encounter. And so I would suggest that before you start this process, you get together some of these documents. So your organization name, you'll need that tax ID number, you will need the unique entity identifier number from sam.gov that Josh talked about earlier. And actually you can see too, and I hope you can see anyway, it's hard to know what your computer screen looks like on your end. But there's some links here where you can actually go to sam.gov, or you can look at our quick guide that's available on our website to help you through this process of obtaining a sam.gov. And again, if you do have issues with this, we're not able to ask for this number for you, but we can give you some advice on how to go through this process. So definitely, if you encounter some trouble, let us know. And then, so let's say you get all of this in here, you get all of your contact information in the system, you've set up your organization account. And once you're in there, you're going to see a screen, it's going to have our logo in the upper left-hand corner. The big words applicant dashboard are going to be right there. This is also what you'll tend to see if you already have an account in the system. So if your organization information is already in there, it'll just take you straight to your dashboard. And you have the cute little home button right there. And right next to it on the right is apply. And if you click on that, that's going to give you your list of grants that you can choose from. And once you click on that, select your grant, then it will give you some additional options there. So that's taking you through the very beginning portion of that.
If you've got questions, please Do not let them burn you. Give us a call, send us an email. We're here to help, and that's a lot of what we do is to reach out with any questions that you have. We love having these opportunities to talk. Please reach out if you've got any more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.